So good evening again. Thank you all for being here this evening. Nonprofit board of directors are integral parts of the nonprofit world, integral to how nonprofit organizations are integrated into communities across the state. And the Alliance is the statewide association that represents all of them in Connecticut, in Hartford and beyond. So we wanted this year to put together a special event just for you as board members who are interested in what your organizations do at the state capitol, and learn about what we do on their behalf, and get some tips and tricks for how you can become a more effective advocate for nonprofits. So we're expecting about 25 folks here tonight. And this is one part of a very, very multi-part training series that we run for nonprofit organizations, their staff and volunteers throughout the year. Just want to run through very quickly some agendas and introductions before we get going. This is what we're going to be talking about tonight. We have you until 6 o'clock, and so we will do our best to get out of here right at 6 o'clock. Then who is with us this evening? We actually are joined by one more person from our staff. So this is our public policy and advocacy team at the Alliance. Our president and CEO, John Carl Casa. I am Ben Shakin, our director of government relations, and we also have Jeff Shaw and Julia Wilcox with us this evening as well. I'm going to turn things over to John Carl to say hello and do a quick introduction for all of you before we get into it. And while he is, I would just ask that in the chat you put who you are, what board of directors you're here representing, what you do during your day job for your daily life, and what you're hoping to get out of the training tonight. So John Carl, take it away.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for coming today to talk about how we at the Alliance can work with you as board members, along with your staffs and state elected officials, to make sure that the people who depend on you get what they need. I want to thank you specifically for your membership in the Alliance and your support of us. Grassroots advocacy, which is really what we're talking about, is only effective if two things happen. The first is that the Alliance is seen as speaking for our membership. And your support for the Alliance through your membership helps us do that. It helps us be the voice of nonprofits in Connecticut. And second is the extent to which members like you have direct contacts with decision makers. And that's what today's meeting's about. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I do want to throw a few numbers at you to show how important it is that you're here and how important your role can be. Nonprofits are $330 million better off will be better off by $330 million by the end of this budget biennium, the 2-year budget cycle of the state. $330 million better than we were at the start. And I want to underscore that was a success because people did a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. And we understand inflation has been 16% the last 2 years. We know about workforce, the workforce crisis, COVID, and demand. We know we got a big job ahead of us. We know you're facing a lot of difficulties. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about the good news and the power that I think you have. There are 115,000 nonprofit employees in Connecticut. Last year, in an effort to pursue the funding, they sent 9,000 emails to legislators and the governor through our website. 2,200 people did that. 2,200 people sent 9,000 emails. And what that means is that there are 113,000 nonprofit employees who we can still get involved as advocates. And then there are boards of directors on top of that. You as members of boards often live in different towns from the one in which the facilities are located. As members of boards of directors are often very active in the community, you have a special role and a special knowledge about your organizations that we can't have. We can talk about an overall picture, but you talking about your organization in a legislator's district means a ton. Luckily, the state has the money this year. There were recent estimates by the legislature's Office of Fiscal Analysis and the Governor's Office of Policy and Management. The state surplus this year above what the state needs, the revenue that's above what the state needs for its budget and for the rainy day fund, the surplus above that is $3.1 billion for this fiscal year. And the forecast for following years is 1.4 billion next year, followed by 1.9 billion and 2.3 billion the year after that. There's $1 billion available under the state spending cap, and the budget reserve fund, the rainy day fund, is full at well over $3 billion. So the one thing I'd like you to take away today is the incredible power you have. It may not always feel that way when you're just one person contacting one legislator, but that's not what you are. You are part of a network of people that includes everybody on this call. It includes board members across Connecticut. It includes CEOs of nonprofit organizations and their staff. And when you all send the same unified message, we can succeed. We can do this year. The need's there, we know that. State money is available. And we have you and more than 133,000 other people out there ready to speak with that one voice. I just want to wrap up by saying, I promise that we will do our part. You have here with you part of our team. We have the best team at the Capitol. And I hope today's session helps you learn how you can be part of that. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks, John Carl. And we will get started. Just real quick before we do, we're also joined tonight by Allison Tishy, who you've corresponded with through your registration process. Allison manages all of our membership things that we do at the Alliance, and we are not all public policy and advocacy, although that's what we will be talking about tonight. We also offer extensive training and professional development programs for nonprofit staff. We offer tuition discounts with academic partners across the state for nonprofit staff. We offer the state's premier and only statewide nonprofit conference, all of which Allison manages. And so just wanted to introduce her to you as well. And she is a wonderful resource if you're ever curious about everything that the Alliance does as part of your role. So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes today going through why we're doing this and why the Alliance exists, why nonprofits across the state many years ago sort of came together to form trade associations, and then why 5 or 6 years ago the two premier trade associations in the state merged to become our organization, the Connecticut Community Nonprofit Alliance. And really it's a question of why does advocacy in the state government and the federal government matter to the work that all of your organizations do. This seems pretty basic, I'm sure, to some of you, but it really goes to kind of the core of what we're working on at the state capitol in broad strokes. And the first piece of this is that representation really matters. The work that your organizations do is very impactful to people's lives and helps keep communities together and help them thrive. And making sure that those communities are represented in the conversations that are happening with the people who are making decisions about how our government should function and where its priorities should lie is a really important niche that I think we work really hard to fill, not just our members as corporations with fiduciary responsibilities and staffs, but also the people that they serve and their needs that our members work every day to meet. And then the other piece is that representation of nonprofit services, of the nonprofit organizations, of the service system, the state's health and human services system in particular, making sure that we do our best to help those organizations speak with one voice at the Capitol. Those are the two sort of, whys behind why nonprofit advocacy is really important. And then the other piece is that the ability to sustain services at the level that I think people in Connecticut want to think their service system functions is really at stake. There's no other group out there sort of looking after the needs of the state's health and human services system broadly besides nonprofits. And this is a quote from one of the executives at BH Care, which is an organization in Southern Connecticut, saying, if we're not up there, if nonprofit staff and board members aren't up there and doing this at the state capitol, who will? Every year services are on the chopping block. And this quote's a couple of years old. Every year now, other groups are looking for increases in funding. And if nonprofits don't get up there and stand up for the work that they do, the services can very easily go away. The other piece that about why it matters is that it's a lot easier than you think. I know we've got a lot of folks in the on today who are board members at Oak Hill as an example, and Oak Hill has taken it upon themselves to invite legislators pretty routinely into their board meetings to hear from nonprofits, and talking at least with some of the folks involved in that. It's been an easier task than folks thought maybe it would be. You've had a lot of success. And so I know we've got a lot of folks with their cameras off. You can raise your hand on Zoom or otherwise, but just sort of by a show of fans, how many people have had past experience and experiences either as a board member or otherwise advocating with your state or federal legislators? How many folks have gotten involved in advocacy at that level before? That's great. I have an iPad Siri-ing me in the background. Sorry about that. Well, that's wonderful. One of the things that we always tell our members, their staff, their executives, is that it's kind of like riding a bike. It can be hard to get started, but once you get going and you figure it out, it gets easier and easier. And the relationships that you establish get easier and easier to maintain and to grow and to expand. These are a couple quotes again from some nonprofit staff here about how they have found advocacy. I'm just curious if there's anybody here tonight who wants to share a little bit about some of the experience that they've had working with their elected officials or state elected or federal, and what they how they feel about whether it's been an easy experience or something that's been more challenging. And feel free, you can unmute yourself and say hello if you'd like.
I'm on the board at FAVAR, and we've met relatively regularly with our reps, and it's always been good on both sides, I think, both for us to listen to them and for them to know what our concerns are. We recently, our state senator retired, and we have a new state senator who, the good news is, I've known for 20 years. So we had both candidates, for an in-person meeting, if you will, with some of the families, just to get their, just so they'd know who we were. And like I said, our state senator, I think, is going to be definitely receptive to listening to our concerns. And, she knows that nonprofits have been underfunded for years. So hopeful that she'll, even though she's a newbie, will be able to introduce some legislation that hopefully will be helpful.
That's great. Anybody else?
I would just say that I've been impressed that pretty much every legislator that I've talked to, formally, informally, has been interested in the topic and wants to learn more. And it doesn't mean they're always going to support what you want to have done, but they seem to have a genuine interest, and many of them really are there to serve their constituents. And it's, as many of you know, none of this is easy stuff. It's conceptually very easy, but the regulations and the rules are complicated. And when you have, I think, roughly a third of the legislators we have today are new in the last few years, and they have to figure it all out. So I think they're happy to have some support for people that care about the topic.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. So we wanted to bring board members together this year. This is the first time we're doing a training specific to boards of directors, because we're interested in trying to grow the number of our members' boards that really engage on these issues. And we think boards represent a really important voice that hasn't been represented in a sort of broad way in the conversations that have happened at the state capitol over the last few years. When you think about what makes a nonprofit corporation different than a for-profit corporation or than other kind of entities, is boards are one of those key pieces that you are, you all come from the communities that organizations are serving. You have a deep invested personal interest in the work that they're doing. And we really want to try to help you all share that perspective with the legislature, in addition to what we have built over the last several decades, which is a very strong consumer advocacy and staff advocacy and executive advocacy group at the Capitol. And the other reason is more strategic, which is that you all are leaders in all of our communities, either in business and industry, definitely in your nonprofit organization. Many of you are involved in the board of directors because you have a particular skill set that can help them help the organization manage itself better, and your involvement can help legislators better understand the breadth of support for nonprofits across their district and across the state. So your voice can help the nonprofits' collective voice at the Capitol be more diverse. Your perspective is different, and but it is still one that believes that the nonprofit system should be better funded and better managed by the state. And so finally, why does it matter that we all do this? And that's that nonprofits across the state are stronger when we are together. We really try as a trade association to help our members speak about the issues that they work on specifically and the things that they care about specifically, but to do it in a way that makes the legislature understand that the Health and Human Services system across the state, the nonprofit system across the state, depends on being lifted up together. And then the final piece is that it works, and we're going to get into a little bit tonight just how well it does and how easy it can be for you to influence the decisions that the legislature is making. When a group even as small as the group that you see in front of you here is 500 or 600 people at the state capitol in the before times, when we could do stuff like this a little bit more easily. When they get together, this kind of level of advocacy, in addition to the emails that go into legislators that John Carl mentioned earlier, really makes a big impact on how they make decisions and how they think about what it is that they are planning to accomplish in legislative session. It also works in small ways. So, we're going to talk about big state budget level issues, which is primarily what we focus on. But there's also little things that in one organization becoming more involved in advocacy can influence if there's something that's a local issue or funding that an organization needs to build part of a new building or those kinds of things. Those are things that boards of directors could very much help to work with legislators across several districts to sort of make happen in small ways that would help your organization. I want to move on and just quickly talk about the Alliance's legislative agenda. I'm going to pull it up on the screen specifically. Now you'll be able to see it. John Carl alluded to this earlier, but just in case you need the details and you're interested in learning what it is that we're asking for at the legislature, the primary thing that's on the Alliance's legislative agenda this year is a significant funding increase for nonprofit services. And we're asking for a 9% cost of living adjustment on contracts that the state holds for services and on rates that the state pays for services in the next year, which is the first year of a 2-year budget cycle, and a 7-year cost of living adjustment in the second year of that budget cycle. And then after that the legislature put into statute an automatic escalator to index what it pays for services to inflation into the future. Nonprofits were flat funded or cut for most, if not the entire Great Recession between 2007 and 2017. 2018, inflation grew significantly, but funds for services from the state, which is the primary payer for services, was kept flat. And while we've made some significant gains, again, that John Carl talked about the last 2 years, they've been eaten up by inflation. And so we're requesting the legislature this year make up that inflationary gap that's happened over the last 2 years. And then to stop us from getting in the position that we were in, again, to index the funds to inflation. We also work on a lot of other issues, and I'm not going to go through them all tonight in the interest of time, but there's lots of other bills and things that the Alliance is working on at the state capitol, things that hopefully matter to your organization in one way or another. And I'll put a link to this in the chat. And then we also operate under a set of guiding principles that we've put together to try to encompass everything that our members work on and care about. And they help inform us as we make decisions on how to support or oppose different other pieces of legislation, which coalitions we should be a part of and join, those kinds of things. So I'm going to put a link to our agenda in the chat so you can look at it in more detail. And we'll send this out to you with the presentation afterwards as well. And I'm also going to put a link in the chat if you're interested in reading a lot more to a white paper that we have published about our request for funding. So let me just type and not talk for 1 sec while I put this in the chat, and then we can continue. All right, so moving on in the presentation, we wanted to go over just a quick sort of primer on who's in the legislature right now, what the makeup of state government is in Connecticut, and then talk a little bit about the legislative process and where you have some opportunities to get involved over the next 5 or 6 months. So Governor Ned Lamont was just inaugurated into his second term a few weeks ago, re-elected in November. The House of Representatives was reconstituted in roughly the same party makeup as it was before. I think there were 5 more Democrats elected than in the last term. There are currently 3 vacancies in the House of Representatives, and there are special elections to fill those vacancies on February 28th. All 3 of the seats that are vacant were held by people who were Democrats, and all 3 of the seats are in pretty heavily Democratic districts. The state Senate has 36 members. There's 24 Democrats and 12 Republicans. There's 1 more Democrat in the state Senate, I believe, than there was the last 2 years. In the Senate, there is a 2/3 majority, if you're doing the math, which is a veto-proof majority. One of the things that David mentioned earlier, which is definitely true, is we have one of the biggest freshman classes in history. There are usually big freshman classes every year that there's been a redistricting, so every decade in the year that ends in 2. there's usually a pretty big freshman class because districts change. People use it as an opportunity to retire. But I think this is the biggest class in some time. And so there are 36 new members of the legislature this session, which is a pretty big percentage out of the 187 total members. And it's a real education opportunity for all of us, relationships to get to know people and to grow. Connecticut is has decided that this year they will have a hybrid legislative session. We went last year into the committee process was pretty much virtual, following a full virtual session in 2021. And this year, everything is completely hybrid. So we are still getting used to it here, and the legislators are still getting used to it. But it's been a couple weeks of trying to figure this out. But all of the committee processes this year are going to be both virtual and in person at the same time. And that includes public hearings. It includes all the committee votes. And then once they are debating legislation in the full chamber of the House or the Senate, members will be there in person, but are still permitted to vote from their office. And so unless they're speaking on the floor, don't need to walk over to the state capitol, can vote from the comfort of their office and the privacy of their office. And so far, it's only been a couple of weeks, but right now committees are kind of hit or miss. There's some committees where half of the members are over Zoom and half of them are in person. There's some committee meetings where it seems like everybody's there in person. There's some where very few people are there in person. So it's likely that some form of hybridness is going to be the reality of the Connecticut General Assembly for some time into the future. This is no longer a COVID protection thing. This is now a reality of 2023 work thing. And so everyone's kind of getting used to what it means and how much they're needed there in person versus over Zoom. Connecticut is a part-time legislature as well. So they are only in session in an odd year, which we are in this year, for 6 months. So session kicked off on January 4th and adjourns on June 7th. Because of that, there are sort of strict timelines for how the legislative process works. And we don't have time to get into a lot of detail about that timing tonight, but there's a distinct difference between the beginning of session through late March, and then the end of session, the last month or two of session in April and May. The first part is almost entirely consumed with committee work. There's 27 legislative committees that consider all sorts of legislation, hold public hearings on every bill that moves through the process, draft legislation, deliberate, and ultimately send legislation to the full legislature. And then the last month or two of session, really the last 2 or 3 weeks of session, the full legislature meets in its chambers and considers all of the bills that have passed committee and decides which ones to pass. They often meet well into the night. But there's almost no committee work that happens once committee deadlines are passed in mostly in the end of March and a few towards the end of April. And there are no public hearings that happen after sort of February, March, early April. Everything is, the committee process is really compressed to the winter months, and then the bill passing process, the opportunity to stand in the hallway and shake hands on the rope line as an advocate, et cetera, is something that really happens in the spring. Just going over very quickly, legislative leadership. This is unchanged, but this is the names of the folks that represent the leadership of the House and the Senate, the Speaker and the Senate President, and then the majority leaders and minority leaders in both chambers. These are good people to know. So if you happen to live in any of these areas or have relationships, they're good people to check in with. The fact that there haven't been lots of changes in this list, so few that we didn't bother to change the year on the slide, sorry about that, is is a little bit deceptive. There are a really significant number of committee leadership that has turned over. Almost every committee has at least one new leader. Connecticut has joint committees, they're House and Senate together. And so there's 2 chairs of each committee, a House member and a senator. And there's 2 ranking members, Republican leaders of the committee, a House member and a senator. Some important committees to us have entirely new leadership, 100% turnover in the leadership. And so education of committee leaders is one of the really important things that we need to do a lot of this session, and that we're hoping you all can help us with. So that's an overview very quickly of the General Assembly and how it works. I want to just now spend a couple minutes going through the ways that we're hoping people can talk to their legislators and get information to them and sort of establish relationships and some tips and tricks for how to do it best. The most effective communication to legislators is from their constituents. So John Carl mentioned this briefly at the beginning. You know, the 4 of us from the Alliance who are working up at the Capitol every day that are on this call, plus our, you know, our contracted lobbying team there. We know folks and we can talk to them, but at the end of the day, we are lobbyists to them. And there's lots of us representing all sorts of different interests. There's many trade associations that have in-house staff people like us. There's many more people whose job it is to be, you know, to contract with companies and organizations to lobby on their behalf. We all wear these little badges. You see one on this is my chest, I think, on this little corner here. They say lobbyist really big on them, and they are far less useful in terms of communication than you, a constituent, someone who votes for them, someone who they recognize from the local coffee shop or grocery store, someone who they might want to form a close relationship with as a way to help them be a better state representative or state senator. And as David sort of alluded to earlier, you know, legislators are really interested in trying to serve their communities better. Some of them have different ideas than you or me about how to do it. They may not always agree, but everyone's motivated by trying to make their district better, by trying to make the state a better place. And so their job is to do that and to try to do things that get them reelected. And so doing good by you, their constituent, is the most important thing to them always. We always have a story that we tell during these trainings, where we were trying to talk to a legislator who was ducking us for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Couldn't get to her. She would just walk past us in the hallway when we try to stop her. And then one day, one of her constituents happened to come up for one of our lobby days. And we said, "Senator, we have a constituent of yours." And she turned around and walked back and said, "Hi, how are you? I'm Senator so-and-so." And we were able to have the conversation with her. And that kind of level of communication is really important. So I'm just curious if I know we asked for folks to tell a sort of general experience with advocacy. Is there anybody who has a story that they can share about, you know, how they've helped establish a relationship as a board member with a nonprofit, with their nonprofit, as a constituent, anything like that? If not, that's okay. In terms of how you can, different ways that you can talk to legislators, Zoom meetings with legislators are kind of the default right now. We've been offering in-person meetings with folks, but a lot of legislators are taking Zooms, and so it makes it a really easy way to get in touch with someone and see them sort of pseudo in person. The other thing is working with legislators to set up tours of facilities. I know Valerie mentioned that earlier. We should make no illusion that most legislators have any idea what your organization does. And so trying to set up tours with legislators to come and see programs, to meet you as a board member and meet the people that are working for the organization that you serve is really important. In Connecticut, email is a better way to get in touch with your legislator than calling their office. And so usually if you've ever, done advocacy for the cause for the federal government, they'll tell you, call, don't email, call the office. They take, the intern who answers the phone will keep track of how you're asking them to vote on this bill. That's true in Connecticut, but legislators generally look at their own email here. In the House, most legislators share a staff person with 5 to 10 other legislators. There's one staff person with a ratio of 5 or 10 legislators. And so as a result, most House members manage their own affairs pretty much. And so emailing them is really the more effective way of communicating than calling the main switchboard and asking to speak with them, which will usually lead you to that one staff person. In the Senate, again, senators, there's fewer of them. Each senator has one staff person. And so while their email signature might say coming from the office of Senator so-and-so, it's an office of one. And so senators also often, while they have a little bit more staff support, they also often look at their own email and manage their own schedules and calendars to some extent. And so emailing them is the best, quick and easy way to get in touch to schedule things to make your voice heard. If you have their cell phone, ignore everything I just said, text away, call them on their cell phone, but their office phones are really the least preferred method in terms of actually getting to them. Our website, if you follow this link here, has a very easy and simple way to do that. If you go to our website, you can just plug your name and address in, and it will populate with who your representatives are and a pre-loaded email message that you can send right to them. You can edit it. We encourage you to do so, but it'll all be right there, and they often respond directly to those emails. And then also some people ask about, should we write sort of formal letters to legislators and send them in the mail? And those can be impactful as well, especially if you're talking about a letter on behalf of an organization or something along those lines. But in terms of establishing a relationship, we really encourage frequent email communication so that you can establish yourself as a trusted source for legislators. So how do you get a legislator's attention? How do you break through the significant amount of attention getting that people are trying to do with them? Keep your message short and to the point. Don't overload them with too much information. Really try to keep your ask very simple. Always make sure that if you want a legislator to do something for you, that you're asking them very directly to do it. Never assume that just because you've insinuated you'd like their support, that you have it. You should always ask for it and say, can I have your vote or your support on this issue? And they may not say yes or no. They may say something that is a middle answer, but the important thing is that you've asked directly. The other thing I'll say about this ask is you don't have to have one every time that you talk to a legislator. One of the most important things that all of our members can do as advocates is establish a relationship with a legislator, to establish themselves as experts in a particular topic, to have you become the go-to when the legislature is looking for information about what it is that you care about. And so you don't have to ask them for support every single time that you talk to them if you're looking to establish that relationship. The other thing that we always tell people is that you really don't have to be an expert in everything. You should stick to what you know when you talk to legislators. Being a legislator is a job that involves needing to be a generalist about a lot of things. There's a million things that you need to know a very little bit about when you're a legislator. And doing something like crafting the state budget is an exercise in priorities. There's a lot of needs in the state. Many of them are important and valid. And building a budget or a policy document as a legislator means prioritizing one over another. or trying to do one thing in order to do another thing. And so legislators will often say, so you want all this money in the budget, how do you expect us to pay for it? You don't need to know the answer to that question. In fact, we encourage you not to have come up with an answer to that question. You will almost certainly be wrong. We are almost certainly always wrong if we come up with them and suggest them. We tell people to stick with what you know. You know, if a legislator says, I hear you, you're right, but how are we going to pay for all of this? Say like, well, that's your job to figure out. Our job is to tell you what the need is and how important it is that you do figure it out. I couldn't begin to tell you what the right tax policy is for the state. I'm here as a nonprofit, someone who cares about nonprofit services. And the more that you can continue to sort of push the thing that you care about and not get sidetracked into other areas that the legislators are hoping for you to get sidetracked in, the more effective your message will be. And then finally, always leave contact information however you can. Always leave your interaction with some kind of follow-up. It's an easy trick to keep the conversation going. You know, always have some, okay, well, I'll get back to you with this piece of information, and then do get back to them. It's a way to keep the relationship building and make the conversation count for double because you just started a new one. The other thing is leveraging your network of people, and this is a little different for boards of directors, but you know, as I said, legislators care most about the people who live in their district, and so your organization that you're serving employs people in multiple districts. It serves people in multiple districts. You as board members of boards of directors usually live in multiple districts, sometimes maybe different districts than the people your organization is serving are living in predominantly. And so being sure to talk to as many people as you possibly can through as many constituents as you possibly can is a really important part of this. Then finally, before we have a couple minutes for questions and answers, wanted to just talk a little bit about public hearings. And this is the kind of action item next step that we're hoping boards of directors can do over the next several weeks and months. Public hearings are the opportunity for you to be heard, for the public in general to be heard on every single piece of legislation that the legislature is considering. Every bill must have a public hearing in its originating committee. Public hearing dates are published 5 calendar days prior to the hearing. That's right, calendar days. So that's Friday at 5 o'clock for a 3 o'clock for a Tuesday morning public hearing. And the other important thing is, if there's any attorneys on the call, you know that all testimony stays with the bill throughout both its legislative journey and then beyond. You know, testimony that you give on a piece of legislation becomes part of what's called a joint favorable report. A committee gets a report of who supports a bill and why, who opposes a bill and why. The legislature looks at that report when they're deciding what to take up, what to pass. And then when a bill passes, if there's ever a legal question of intent of the legislature, the record of public hearings, the testimony that was submitted, the transcript of those public hearings can be used in court to establish legislative intent. And so the public hearing process, from a technical sense, is really important, and we encourage as many people as possible to get involved. So there's some new rules this year for hybrid public hearings. If you've ever participated in one before, you can watch all of them in all committee business on each committee's YouTube channel. They have a YouTube live channel. If you decide to testify, you'll be sent a Zoom link, much like you were to today's meeting, and you'll be sit in a waiting room watching the hearing as an observer, basically until just before it's your turn to testify, and then they'll let you into a room that looks like this, and you'll be able to turn your video on and unmute yourself right before it's your turn. You'll get 3 minutes to testify then, and legislators are free to ask you questions after your 3 minutes is over, and they can ask. There's no time limit on the questions officially. Sometimes chairs stop calling on people. But otherwise, there's no time limit. There's also no limit on how many people can testify at a public hearing. There is no process where there's a time that runs out and the hearing ends. The hearings go as long as there are people waiting to testify. And so there have been hearings that last all night into the next day. And when you sign up, you're given a lottery assignment with everyone else who testified in terms of when your order is on the list. So it's important, if it's a long list, to make sure that you're monitoring in one way or another so that you can be at your device and turn it on and when it's your turn to speak. But that's something that the Alliance definitely could help with. We will be monitoring hearings. We will send emails and text messages when it's close to your turn. You don't need to worry about being on Zoom for 5 hours prior to your turn. It's something where you can really hop on 10 or 15 minutes before, or if you like. You'll also have the opportunity to do this in person this year. And so if you value in-person conversation and relationships, you'll be able to offer your testimony in person this year. We don't know today exactly how in practice this is all going to work. So we expect that things are probably going to change in terms of what the culture is at the Capitol and otherwise as legislative hearings go forward. There will be times when an individual legislator might have 2 or 3 hearings going on at the same time. Will that person choose one, choose one to sit in a committee meeting, or will they end up going home and being on Zoom for them? All of that kind of remains to be seen. And so as a result, unfortunately, our advice is that we aren't really sure whether Zoom or in person is going to be preferential this year. We'll have to wait and see to figure out what the legislature wants. But what we do know today is participation is still important. It's as important as it has ever been. And so if you aren't sure if you want to come all the way to Hartford and sit and wait to testify in a committee room, and that Zoom sounds like a really easy way to get in, please Zoom. Even if we say we'd like you to come in person, Zoom is still better than not participating at all. So keep your testimony short. You only have 3 minutes. I often give people who have just started doing this and don't have a lot of public speaking experience or whatever, the advice that even if you've written a piece of formal testimony that you're submitting as written testimony, that you sketch out however you like to sketch out when you talk to people in public. You sketch out 3 minutes. I usually block paragraphs of my written testimony that I want to highlight. That's my method, but sometimes it helps people to write themselves a separate script. If you are testifying at a hearing where a lot of people are saying a lot of the same thing, we always tell you to tell a story. That will be the most impactful thing that you can do for legislators. Statistics are helpful and important. If you can tell a story through them, great. But telling a story is the most important piece of how you can make a difference at public hearings. You can sum up your position at the end and then always offer follow-up. So like I said, you get 3 minutes, but questions are limitless. So always say, I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has them, or say, I'd be happy to get back to the committee with more information. If it gives legislators an introduction to try to get more information from you, maybe gives you some time to extend your testimony. As far as in-person versus written testimony goes, you can do both. You can do either. You are allowed to testify in person or over Zoom without having submitted any written testimony to the record. There's a transcript of public hearings. Your comments will be immortalized into the record that way. You are also free to submit written testimony without testifying in person, and that testimony will become part of the record. You can do both. You don't have to write a research paper as far as your written testimony goes. I should say there's no limit on how long it can be. It can be as long or as short as you want. This is my favorite example of, oh no, I'm gonna have to switch screen shares here. This is my favorite example of the shortest testimony that I've ever seen on a bill that I think we were supporting 5 or 6 years ago that would have established a fee on marriage licenses to fund domestic violence programs. That's Franklin Rutledge's contribution to the legislative process. And I have it hanging on my wall in my office. If you do get questions, just only answer what you know the answer to. It's totally appropriate, and you will get sometimes some questions way out of left field from legislators that you trigger something in their mind that they wanted to ask someone about, and you might have no idea what they're talking about. And sometimes people get caught trying to come up with an answer to something when they don't really know the answer. You should always resist that urge. It's a strong urge, but resist it and say, I really don't have that information in front of me. Let me get back to you with an answer. And then do that follow-up. But it should go without saying, arguing with members of the committee is generally a bad idea. And the other thing is, if you're there, you're listening to the hearing, somebody says something in front of you and it triggers a thought in your mind, it's totally okay to build on what someone in front of you says, to say, I heard, Dan earlier said this, and it made me think of this issue in my organization, or I was listening to what the commissioner said earlier today, and I wanted to provide a little bit of feedback on what they've told you is going on. Those kinds of things help the committee contextualize what they're hearing, and often lead to more interaction and questions. So I will just give you two other ways to stay informed really quickly, and then take the last 5 minutes for questions. First, if you haven't already, you are definitely welcome as board members to sign up for the Alliance's email communications, get our action alerts, find out what we want you to do during the legislative session. If you need help doing that, we will put those resources in the follow-up email with these materials. And then if you're interested in sort of just keeping tabs on what's going on in the legislature, the General Assembly's website is actually a really wonderful example of transparency in government. It has every piece of information you could possibly need about what's happening every day at the state capitol, what bills are being considered, and I'd encourage you to spend some time getting to know it. So here's some contact information, which for all the different offices, and we will open things up for any questions or comments. Anybody?
So you said that you recorded this. How will we access that?
Yes, once the meeting is over, tomorrow we will send out an email with a link to the recording and the materials as well. It'll come from Allison, so you should look out for it.
And it's okay to share that with other board members?
Yes. it
Okay,
is.
thank you.
Is there a listing of the committee members or the committees and the committee members that we could reach out to?
Yes, the General Assembly's website has a list of all of the committees and all of their members. If you go to it, you can see the different committees and then go through their membership. If you're asking about, are there sort of specific, some of the committee leadership changes that I talked about, we can also send a list of the committee leaders that highlights which ones are new.
Yeah,
you
that
can
would be great,
contact.
like especially like in the spider web chart that you had.
Yes, yep.
Thank you.
Hey Ben, what channels do we have for question if we have questions after today?
You should feel free to contact any of us. Someone just asked in the chat if you could put the contact info for the caucuses up on the screen. Yeah, you should feel free to contact any of us. We will also include our contact information in the follow-up email. I'll put my email in the chat right now as well. I'll also just say we are happy to join one of your board meetings if you're interested, and talk to your greater board if not all of you are here tonight. I know we've got a sort of concentration from a few boards here tonight, but John Carl is happy to come and introduce himself. If it's something that you're interested in, just have your CEO reach out to us and we'd be happy to do 10 minutes on a board agenda or something and talk about what we're looking for. Just from a timing perspective, I think I skipped over this. There will be hearings on the state budget the week of Valentine's Day and the week after Valentine's Day. And so there will be a night or two, an evening or two during those 2 weeks that we are hoping to have hundreds and hundreds of people testify at the Appropriations Committee for 3 minutes about the state budget. So that's the real this next sort of inflection point that we're really hoping folks from across all different walks of life will participate in. Well, if there's nothing else, it's 6 o'clock. We want to be respectful of your time. So thank you very much for being here today. I hope it was helpful, and look out for all those details in a follow-up email from Allison. Thanks for coming, and we hope to work to engage your boards a lot more. So thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.